The morning sun cast long shadows across the dense Montana wilderness as Senior Park Ranger Jack Morrison adjusted his radio equipment. The crackling static filled the small ranger station as he prepared for what seemed like another routine patrol day. His 23 years of experience in Glacier National Park had taught him to expect the unexpected, but nothing could have prepared him for what was about to unfold. Sarah Chun, a 17-year-old from Seattle, had convinced her parents to let her join a youth wilderness program during her summer break. She was an honors student with dreams of studying environmental science, but she also harbored a secret that none of her fellow campers knew about. Growing up in an urban environment had never dulled her fascination with firearms, a passion she had developed through her grandfather's patient teaching during childhood visits to his rural farm. The wilderness program had been running smoothly for 6 days. 23 teenagers from various backgrounds had come together to learn survival skills, wildlife conservation, and outdoor leadership. Sarah had quickly emerged as one of the most capable participants, her quiet determination and natural instincts earning respect from both counselors and peers. She possessed an unusual combination of academic intelligence and practical wilderness skills that set her apart from the typical city-raised participants. That fateful morning started like any other. The group had been tracking elk movement patterns through a remote valley, documenting their findings as part of a citizen science project. The area was known for its pristine beauty, but also its challenges: steep terrain, unpredictable weather, and the occasional presence of large predators. The program leaders had chosen this location specifically because it would test the participants' growing confidence and skills. Unknown to the peaceful group of young researchers, a dangerous situation was developing just 3 miles away. A heavily armed militia group had been using the remote wilderness area as a training ground for several weeks. These individuals had become increasingly paranoid and aggressive, viewing any outsiders as potential threats to their secretive activities. They had established a makeshift camp in a hidden canyon, complete with weapons caches and communication equipment. The militia leader, a former military officer named Marcus Briggs, had been court-martialed years earlier for insubordination and had since harbored deep resentment against any form of government authority. His followers, mostly disaffected men in their 20s and 30s, had been drawn to his anti-government rhetoric and promises of creating their own version of order in the wilderness. They had been monitoring park ranger communications and had grown suspicious of the youth program's activities in what they considered their territory. As Sarah and her group continued their elk tracking project, they were unaware that they had wandered closer to the militia's perimeter than any civilian had in weeks. The morning air was crisp and clear, carrying sounds further than usual. The rhythmic crunch of hiking boots on fallen leaves and the occasional whispered observation about wildlife signs seemed innocent enough, but to the paranoid militia members, these sounds represented an unwelcome intrusion. Marcus had positioned sentries throughout the area surrounding their camp. These men, armed with high-powered rifles and military-grade communication equipment, had been instructed to report any unusual activity immediately. When they first detected the approaching voices of the youth group, their training kicked in automatically. The militia had been expecting potential government surveillance or law enforcement reconnaissance, not a group of teenagers on an educational expedition. The first radio transmission came at exactly 8:47 a.m. Base, this is Sentry 2. Multiple contacts approaching from the northeast. Estimate 15 to 20 individuals, moving slowly through Sector 7. Marcus's response was immediate and aggressive. His paranoia had been building for weeks, fed by conspiracy theories and an increasing sense of persecution. Maintain position and continue monitoring. Do not engage unless directly threatened. Sarah had stopped to examine fresh elk droppings when she first heard the unmistakable sound of a rifle bolt being cycled. Her grandfather's training had given her an ear for such sounds, and she instantly recognized the metallic click that most people would have dismissed as a snapping branch. A chill ran down her spine as she realized that someone with a weapon was nearby, and that someone was not a park ranger or fellow camper. The 17-year-old faced a split-second decision that would define not only her own fate, but the fate of 22 other young people who were completely unaware of the danger surrounding them. Her mind raced through possibilities and scenarios, drawing on every lesson her grandfather had taught her about firearms, tactics, and survival. She knew that alerting the group might cause panic, but remaining silent could lead to catastrophe. Without drawing attention to herself, Sarah began to assess their tactical situation with the cold precision of someone far older than her years. The group was spread out along a game trail in a natural depression, completely exposed to anyone holding the high ground. Their bright outdoor gear made them highly visible, and their relaxed demeanor showed they had no awareness of potential threats. Most concerning of all, their group leaders were focused on the educational aspects of the expedition and had no military or tactical training. In those crucial moments, Sarah made a decision that would prove to be the first of many that morning that would save lives. She quietly moved toward the program leader, Dr. Emily Rodriguez, while scanning the ridgelines for signs of the armed presence she knew was there. Her movements were deliberate and controlled, designed to avoid sudden motions that might trigger a violent response from whoever was watching them through rifle scopes. Dr. Emily Rodriguez was pointing out elk browsing patterns on nearby vegetation when Sarah approached her with unusual urgency. The teenager's normally calm demeanor had shifted to something Emily had never seen before, a focused intensity that seemed far beyond her years. Sarah spoke in a whisper that was barely audible, but carried unmistakable authority. Dr. Rodriguez, we need to move the group immediately. There are armed people watching us from the ridgeline. Emily's first instinct was to dismiss this as teenage imagination, but something in Sarah's tone and body language made her pause. The girl's eyes were constantly scanning their surroundings with military-like precision, and her posture had shifted into what looked like a defensive stance. Before Emily could respond, the crackling sound of a radio transmission echoed across the valley. The voices were too distant to understand clearly, but the tone was unmistakably tactical and aggressive. Sarah's grandfather had taught her to recognize military communication patterns, and what she was hearing confirmed her worst fears. These weren't park rangers or fellow wilderness enthusiasts. They were organized, armed, and treating the youth group as potential targets. Marcus Briggs had grown increasingly agitated as he monitored his sentry's reports. His paranoid worldview interpreted the youth group's presence as a sophisticated government operation designed to discover his militia's location. In his twisted logic, using teenagers as scouts was exactly the kind of deceptive tactic he expected from federal agencies. He grabbed his radio and issued orders that would escalate the situation beyond any reasonable response. All units, this is command. The approaching contacts are likely reconnaissance assets. Prepare to engage on my orders. We will not allow our position to be compromised. The radio channels erupted with confirmations from various sentry positions, creating a communication network that Sarah could partially intercept with her group's emergency radio equipment. Sarah had learned basic radio operation as part of the Wilderness program, but her grandfather had taught her much more advanced communication techniques during their time together. She recognized the military-style brevity codes and tactical terminology being used by the unknown armed group. More importantly, she understood that the situation was deteriorating rapidly and that conventional responses would not be sufficient to protect her fellow participants. The 17-year-old made a decision that would have seemed impossible for someone her age under normal circumstances. She approached the group's emergency radio and began attempting to contact park ranger headquarters using protocols she had memorized from her grandfather's old military manuals. Her hands moved with surprising confidence as she adjusted frequencies and began transmitting what would become one of the most crucial distress calls in Park Service history. Glacier Park Control, this is Wilderness Education Group 7. Emergency traffic, over. The response came immediately from Ranger Morrison, who had been monitoring their frequency as part of standard safety procedures. Group 7, this is Park Control. Go ahead with your emergency. Sarah's voice remained calm despite the gravity of their situation. Park Control, we have armed contacts in our vicinity, possibly hostile. Request immediate assistance and tactical support. Jack Morrison's 23 years of experience had taught him to take all emergency calls seriously, but this transmission was unlike anything he had encountered. The calm, professional tone of the teenage caller suggested military training, but the The situation she described seemed almost impossible in their normally peaceful wilderness area. Nevertheless, his training kicked in automatically. Group 7. Can you confirm armed contacts? What is your exact location? Sarah provided their GPS coordinates with precision that impressed the veteran ranger. She had been tracking their position throughout the morning using techniques her grandfather had taught her, understanding that navigation skills could mean the difference between life and death in emergency situations. Park Control confirmed armed contacts with military-style communications. Multiple positions on surrounding ridgelines. Group is currently exposed in natural depression approximately 200 meters north of Elk Creek confluence. The militia sentries had been watching this radio exchange through high-powered optics. Marcus received reports that the apparent leader of the youth group was communicating with outside authorities using sophisticated procedures. This confirmed his paranoid suspicions and triggered his most aggressive response yet. He issued orders that would transform a tense standoff into an active combat situation. All units, prepare to neutralize the reconnaissance team. They have established communications with hostile forces. Engage on my command. The radio traffic was now being intercepted not only by Sarah but also by park ranger communication centers throughout the region. Jack Morrison realized that they were facing an unprecedented crisis that would require resources far beyond typical park emergency response capabilities. Sarah understood that their window for peaceful resolution was closing rapidly. Her grandfather's combat experience in Afghanistan had taught him that certain tactical situations could only be resolved through decisive action, and he had passed these hard-earned lessons on to his granddaughter. She faced a choice that no teenager should ever have to make: remain passive and hope for rescue, or take active measures to protect 22 innocent lives. The militia's first warning shot shattered the morning silence with a crack that echoed across the valley like thunder. The high-powered rifle round struck a tree trunk just meters from where the youth group had been standing, sending bark fragments flying and causing immediate panic among the inexperienced campers. Most of them had never heard gunfire outside of movies, and the sudden reality of being under attack created chaos that threatened to make their situation even more dangerous. Dr. Rodriguez struggled to maintain control as her students scattered in various directions, their wilderness training evaporating in the face of genuine terror. Some froze in place, paralyzed by fear, while others ran blindly through the forest without any consideration for tactical concealment or safety. The carefully planned educational expedition had transformed into a nightmare scenario that none of their training had prepared them to handle. Sarah watched the disintegration of her group's discipline with growing alarm. She understood that panic and random movement would make them easier targets for the militia snipers who now had clear fields of fire from multiple positions. Drawing on every lesson her grandfather had taught her about leadership under fire, she made a decision that would define the next several hours of their lives. Moving with purpose through the scattered group, Sarah began implementing tactical procedures that seemed impossible for someone her age to know. She directed frightened teenagers toward natural cover, established communication protocols, and began organizing a defensive perimeter using terrain features her trained eye had identified. Her calm authority in the midst of chaos gradually began to restore some measure of order among the panicked group members. Jack Morrison's hands moved across his communication equipment with practiced efficiency as he coordinated what was rapidly becoming the largest emergency response in Glacier National Park's history. The teenager's calm professionalism during her initial distress call had convinced him that they were facing a genuine tactical crisis, not a case of mistaken identity or teenage imagination. His next transmission would set in motion a chain of events that would test every aspect of wilderness law enforcement capabilities. Dispatch, this is Morrison. Implement Protocol 7 immediately. We have confirmed hostile armed contacts engaging civilian group in Sector 12. Request immediate tactical support and medical evacuation capabilities. The response came from Regional Emergency Coordination Center with military-style brevity. Copy Protocol 7. FBI hostage rescue team and National Guard aviation assets are being notified. ETA tactical support 45 minutes minimum. 45 minutes might as well have been 45 hours for Sarah and her trapped companions. The militia's warning shot had been followed by increasingly aggressive positioning as armed men moved through the forest with obvious tactical training. Through her emergency radio, Sarah could hear fragments of their communications as they coordinated what appeared to be an encirclement maneuver designed to eliminate any possibility of escape. Marcus Briggs had convinced himself that the youth group was an elaborate federal operation designed to infiltrate his organization. His paranoid delusions had reached a point where rational thinking was impossible, and he was now committed to a course of action that would inevitably result in violence. His radio transmissions reflected a mind that had lost touch with reality but retained dangerous tactical capabilities. Final positions, all units. These government operatives will not leave this valley alive. We have been preparing for this moment for months. The chilling declaration was intercepted by Sarah's radio equipment, giving her crucial intelligence about their attackers' intentions. Unlike her panicked companions, she understood that they were no longer dealing with a misunderstanding or territorial dispute. They were facing enemies who intended to kill them all. Sarah's grandfather had always emphasized that survival in combat situations required not just courage but also intelligence and adaptability. She quickly assessed their resources and found them desperately inadequate for the situation they faced. The group's emergency supplies included basic first aid equipment, emergency rations, and communication gear, but nothing that could serve as defensive weapons against military-trained attackers with high-powered rifles. However, her grandfather's unconventional training had taught her that almost any environment contained potential weapons and defensive tools for those who knew how to identify and use them. The forest floor was covered with rocks of various sizes, fallen branches that could serve as clubs or projectiles, and natural terrain features that could provide concealment and defensive positions. More importantly, she understood that psychological warfare could be as effective as physical weapons in certain situations. Dr. Rodriguez had managed to gather most of the group behind a fallen log that provided minimal concealment from the ridgeline positions. The teenagers huddled together in terror, many of them crying quietly as they struggled to understand how their peaceful wilderness adventure had transformed into a life-threatening crisis. Their instructor tried to maintain calm authority, but her own fear was evident in her trembling voice as she attempted to reassure her students. Sarah approached Dr. Rodriguez with a plan that would have seemed absurd coming from anyone else her age. "I need you to give me operational command of the group," she said with quiet intensity. "I have training that might keep us alive until help arrives." Emily's academic background had not prepared her for making such decisions, but the teenager's obvious competence in tactical matters was their only hope for survival. The 17-year-old's first action as unofficial group leader was to establish better defensive positions using natural terrain features she had identified during their panicked movement. She directed small teams to different locations, spreading their group out to avoid presenting concentrated targets while maintaining communication through hand signals and whispered instructions. Her tactical thinking was sophisticated enough to impress professional soldiers, let alone her frightened fellow students. Marcus and his militia had completed their encirclement and were preparing for what they called the final assault. Their radio traffic indicated coordinated movement from multiple directions, with timing planned to overwhelm any resistance the trapped group might offer. Sarah intercepted enough of their communications to understand that the attack would begin within minutes, giving her almost no time to implement defensive measures. The first militia assault came from the eastern ridgeline as 3 armed men began moving down the slope toward their position. Sarah had anticipated this approach route and had positioned herself where she could observe their movement while remaining concealed behind natural cover. What happened next would become the subject of intense analysis by tactical experts and would fundamentally change how wilderness emergency response protocols were designed. Drawing on every lesson her grandfather had taught her about unconventional warfare, Sarah began implementing harassment tactics designed to disrupt the attacker's coordination and confidence. Using rocks as projectiles, she began targeting the militia members with surprising accuracy, forcing them to take cover and breaking up their organized advance. Her throwing technique, perfected through years of practice with her grandfather, allowed her to deliver painful and disorienting strikes from concealed positions. The militia members had expected to face frightened teenagers cowering helplessly in the forest, Instead, they found themselves under attack from an opponent who seemed to understand their tactical methods and was actively working to counter them. Sarah's harassment campaign created confusion and hesitation among the attackers, buying precious time for her group while causing the militia to question their assumptions about their targets. Marcus's radio communications became increasingly frustrated as his carefully planned assault encountered unexpected resistance. Units 2 and 3 report status. Why have you not secured the eastern approach? The responses revealed that his men were facing more organized opposition than anticipated. Command, targets are actively engaging with projectiles. Request permission to return fire with lethal force. Jack Morrison monitored these intercepted transmissions with growing alarm. The situation was escalating beyond anything park emergency protocols had ever anticipated. His radio crackled with updates from multiple agencies as federal tactical teams raced toward the remote location. Morrison, this is FBI Tactical Coordinator Williams. What can you tell us about the civilian group's defensive capabilities? Sarah's radio discipline impressed the veteran ranger as she provided concise tactical updates while continuing to coordinate her group's defensive efforts. Park control, we are maintaining defensive positions using natural terrain. Unknown number of hostiles approaching from multiple vectors. Estimate 15 to 20 minutes before our position is overrun without immediate support. Her calm professionalism under extreme stress demonstrated training and mental toughness that seemed impossible for someone her age. The sound of approaching helicopters provided the first ray of hope for the trapped youth group, but Sarah understood that rescue was still far from certain. Her grandfather's combat experience had taught her that the most dangerous moments in any tactical situation often occurred during extraction operations, when both sides became desperate and unpredictable. The militia's radio communications indicated they had also heard the aircraft and were preparing for a final assault before federal forces could intervene. FBI Tactical Coordinator Williams established communication with Sarah directly, recognizing that her tactical competence made her the most reliable source of ground truth about their situation. Group 7 Leader, this is FBI Tactical. We have assets inbound but need accurate intelligence on hostile positions and capabilities. Can you provide tactical assessment? Sarah's response demonstrated situational awareness that impressed federal tactical experts monitoring the operation. FBI Tactical, estimate 12 to 15 hostiles with military-style weapons and communications equipment. Primary threat from eastern and northern ridgelines with overlapping fields of fire. Hostiles appear to have military training and are coordinating complex assault patterns. Our position will be overrun within 10 minutes without immediate intervention. Marcus Briggs had reached a point of complete tactical desperation. The approaching helicopters represented everything he had been fighting against, federal authority invading what he considered sovereign territory. His radio transmissions to his men reflected a mind that had abandoned any pretense of rational thinking and was now focused solely on inflicting maximum damage before inevitable capture or death. All units, final assault in 2 minutes. Kill them all and withdraw to secondary positions. We will not allow these government operatives to compromise our mission. The militia members, already shaken by Sarah's unexpected resistance and the approaching federal response, began to question their leader's judgment. Several of them were beginning to understand that they had made a catastrophic error in targeting what appeared to be genuine civilian teenagers. Sarah recognized that the next few minutes would determine whether her defensive tactics had bought enough time for professional rescue or whether she would need to attempt something far more dangerous. Her grandfather's most advanced lessons had dealt with offensive tactics, methods for neutralizing armed opponents when defensive measures were no longer sufficient. She had hoped never to use such knowledge, but the militia's obvious intention to kill everyone in her group was forcing her toward decisions no teenager should ever face. The first helicopter to arrive was a National Guard medical evacuation aircraft, whose crew immediately recognized that they were flying into an active combat zone. The pilot, Chief Warrant Officer Rebecca Hayes, had extensive combat experience in Afghanistan and quickly coordinated with FBI tactical elements to establish a secure landing zone. Her radio communications with Sarah demonstrated the respect that professional military personnel had developed for the teenager's tactical abilities. Group 7 Leader, this is Rescue 1. We need you to mark your positions with signal devices and prepare for tactical extraction under hostile fire. Can you maintain defensive perimeter for 3 more minutes? Sarah's response came without hesitation despite the obvious strain in her voice. Rescue 1, copy 3 minutes. Marking friendly positions now. Be advised hostiles are preparing final assault from multiple directions. The militia's attack began with suppressing fire from the eastern ridgeline, forcing Sarah's group to take cover behind increasingly inadequate natural barriers. The high-powered rifle rounds splintered trees and sent rock fragments flying as the attackers attempted to pin down their targets before advancing for close-range engagement. Several of the teenagers suffered minor injuries from flying debris, but Sarah's tactical positioning had prevented direct casualties. FBI tactical teams had finally reached positions where they could provide counter-sniper fire against the militia positions. The professional law enforcement response was overwhelming compared to the militia's amateur military capabilities, but the terrorist group's willingness to fight to the death made them extremely dangerous during their final moments. Agent Williams coordinated his team's response while maintaining communication with Sarah about her group's status. Sarah made a decision that would become the defining moment of the entire crisis. Recognizing that the militia's final assault would overwhelm their defensive positions despite federal support, she chose to implement the most aggressive tactic her grandfather had ever taught her. Instead of waiting to be overrun, she would launch a preemptive attack designed to disrupt the militia's coordination at the most critical moment. Using terrain features she had memorized during the defensive phase, Sarah moved through the forest with stealth techniques that allowed her to approach the militia's advanced positions undetected. Her grandfather's training had emphasized that surprise and audacity could overcome superior firepower when applied with precise timing and execution. What she was attempting was tactically sound, but incredibly dangerous for someone with no actual combat experience. The militia members advancing through the eastern approach were focused on their target area and not expecting an attack from their flank. Sarah's assault began with a series of precisely thrown rocks that struck 2 of the men in the head and shoulders, causing them to stumble and creating confusion about the direction of attack. Before they could recover their tactical formation, she had moved to a new position and continued her harassment campaign. Marcus Briggs watched his carefully planned final assault disintegrate as his men reported attacks from unexpected directions by an opponent who seemed to anticipate their every move. His radio communications became increasingly frantic as he tried to understand how a group of teenagers had transformed into tactical opponents capable of disrupting professional military operations. All units, identify and neutralize the hostile commander immediately. This operation cannot fail. But his men were already beginning to withdraw as FBI tactical teams closed in from multiple directions. The combination of Sarah's harassment tactics and professional law enforcement pressure had created chaos among the militia ranks, turning their coordinated assault into a desperate retreat. The National Guard helicopter pilot seized the tactical opportunity created by Sarah's attack to land in the defensive perimeter and begin evacuating the most seriously injured group members. Chief Warrant Officer Hayes provided covering fire with the aircraft's door-mounted weapons, while her crew chief coordinated the loading of wounded teenagers. The extraction operation proceeded with military precision despite continuing hostile fire from militia positions. Sarah's radio call to the extraction team reflected the exhaustion and stress she had been managing throughout the crisis. Rescue 1. This is Group 7 Leader. All personnel accounted for and ready for extraction. Be advised, I am moving to rejoin main group from current flanking position. Her tactical competence had saved 23 lives, but the psychological cost of her actions would not become apparent until much later. The extraction helicopter lifted off from the wilderness clearing with all 24 members of the youth group safely aboard, marking the end of the most intense wilderness rescue operation in national park history. Sarah sat quietly in the aircraft's jump seat, her tactical radio still crackling with communications between FBI teams as they continued pursuit of the scattered militia members. The contrast between her calm demeanor and the chaos of the previous hours impressed the military crew who had witnessed her tactical performance firsthand. Chief Warrant Officer Hayes approached Sarah during the flight to the medical facility, curiosity evident in her expression. "Young lady, I've been flying combat missions for 12 years, and I've never seen tactical thinking like yours from someone your age. Where did you learn those skills?" Sarah's response was simple, but carried implications that would later reshape emergency response training protocols across multiple agencies. "My grandfather served 3 tours in Afghanistan. He taught me that survival sometimes requires making hard decisions quickly." The brevity of her explanation concealed the depth of knowledge that had been passed down through patient instruction over several years. Her grandfather's combat experience had been distilled into practical lessons that emphasized adaptability, resource management, and psychological warfare techniques that proved effective against conventionally trained opponents. FBI Tactical Coordinator Williams debriefed Sarah during the medical evaluation process, documenting her tactical decisions for analysis by federal training instructors. Her ability to coordinate defensive operations, gather intelligence through radio intercepts, and implement harassment tactics had prevented what could have been a mass casualty incident. The 17-year-old's performance would become a case study in unconventional leadership during crisis situations. The militia leader Marcus Briggs was captured 3 hours later when FBI teams surrounded his final position in a remote canyon. His paranoid delusions had cost him everything: his freedom, his organization, and his ability to harm innocent people. During interrogation, he expressed genuine surprise that his targets had been actual wilderness education participants rather than federal operatives, revealing the depth of his mental disconnect from reality. Dr. Emily Rodriguez struggled to understand how one of her students had possessed tactical knowledge that saved their lives. Her academic background in environmental science had not prepared her to recognize military training, and Sarah's quiet competence throughout the wilderness program had seemed like typical teenage leadership rather than combat-ready capabilities. The revelation changed her perspective on the complexity hidden within seemingly ordinary young people. Park Ranger Jack Morrison's incident report would eventually lead to comprehensive changes in wilderness emergency protocols. Sarah's radio discipline and tactical communication had provided crucial intelligence that enabled rapid federal response, demonstrating the value of advanced communication training for civilian wilderness programs. Her performance highlighted gaps in standard emergency procedures that had never been identified through conventional training scenarios. The media attention surrounding the incident focused primarily on the militia's terrorist activities and the federal response, but Sarah's role remained largely confidential due to her minor status and security considerations. FBI analysts were concerned that publicizing her tactical capabilities might encourage other extremist groups to target wilderness education programs specifically to test their security measures against unconventional opponents. Sarah's grandfather visited her during the psychological evaluation process, bringing with him a perspective that helped counselors understand the source of her remarkable capabilities. His military service had been distinguished by success in training local forces in unconventional warfare techniques, skills that he had adapted for civilian survival applications during his granddaughter's visits to his rural property over several years. "I taught her to think tactically because the world can be dangerous," he explained to federal psychologists. "I never expected her to face actual combat, but I wanted her to have every possible advantage if survival ever depended on her decisions." His training philosophy had emphasized mental toughness and adaptability rather than specific weapon skills, creating capabilities that proved effective in civilian emergency situations. The other members of the youth group struggled with post-traumatic stress symptoms in the weeks following their rescue. Several required extended counseling to process their experiences, while others found their perspectives on personal safety and wilderness activities permanently changed. Sarah's psychological evaluation revealed remarkable resilience, but counselors noted signs of premature emotional maturity that reflected the burden of having made life and death decisions at such a young age. Federal tactical training instructors requested permission to interview Sarah about her defensive strategies and harassment tactics. Her improvised techniques had proven effective against conventionally trained opponents, providing insights that could enhance instruction for both military and law enforcement personnel. The 17-year-old's tactical innovations demonstrated the value of creative thinking during crisis situations when standard procedures were inadequate. The Wilderness Education Program suspended operations for 6 months while security protocols were reviewed and enhanced. Sarah's experience had revealed vulnerabilities in civilian outdoor programs that had never been seriously considered by program administrators or insurance companies. New procedures emphasized communication capabilities, threat assessment training, and coordination protocols with federal law enforcement agencies. Sarah returned to her normal life in Seattle with a scholarship offer from the FBI's Youth Development Program and multiple invitations to speak at tactical training conferences. However, she chose to pursue her original plan of studying environmental science, understanding that her extraordinary experience represented skills she hoped never to use again rather than a career direction she wanted to follow. Her grandfather's final lesson came during a quiet conversation 6 months after the incident. "The most important thing I taught you," he said, "was not how to fight, but when fighting becomes necessary to protect others. You made the right decisions when it mattered most." Sarah's tactical performance had demonstrated not just technical competence, but also moral courage under extreme pressure. The impact of Sarah's actions extended far beyond the immediate rescue operation. Her tactical innovations were incorporated into federal training programs. Her communication protocols became standard procedures for wilderness emergency response, and her psychological resilience became a model for crisis leadership training. The 17-year-old who had faced down armed terrorists became a quiet hero whose influence on emergency response capabilities would last for decades. Jack Morrison retired from the Park Service 2 years later, but he never forgot the radio call that had changed his understanding of what civilians could accomplish under extreme circumstances. Sarah's calm professionalism during the crisis had reminded him that heroism often emerged from unexpected sources when ordinary people faced extraordinary challenges with courage and intelligence. The story of the teenager who turned a potential massacre into a successful rescue operation became a confidential case study taught at military academies and law enforcement training facilities across the country. Sarah Chun had demonstrated that tactical thinking, moral courage, and decisive action could overcome overwhelming odds when applied with intelligence and determination. Her legacy would inspire future generations of first responders and civilian leaders facing their own moments of crisis.